Let's continue working with CSS to learn about how we can modify our WordPress website using the child theme. We're not going to be augmenting everything that we possibly could on this page, but I did want to show you a few more things so that you could have a little bit more practice in the approach that you would take when you want to find out what class is controlling a specific element. If you notice at the large screen, the main content on my page, for the most part, is fairly narrow. I have a lot of unused real estate, and I'm not saying we need to use all of it, but it seems that the actual content that's displaying on my page could certainly use a little bit more horizontal room. Once again, I'm going to open my developer tools so that I can find what's controlling this. In this case, I want to find out why these page elements are so narrow. If we go ahead and click on some of the main page content, you can see that this div has a class of WP block group, and there's nothing here, but if we scroll down in our CSS, eventually we're going to find this rule right here. There is a CSS variable that is setting the global content size to 645. I feel like this is way too narrow for use on my web page. I want to update that so that my web page has more horizontal space to display the content. Let's change this to 900. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the variable. We'll jump back into our custom CSS. And I like to put my variables at the top of the page. It's just kind of a habit that I've gotten into. So I'm going to go ahead and make a comment here that identifies this as a global variable. And then we'll go ahead and use our :root as the selector. That's going to get everything. I'll open my curly braces and I'm going to use the same variable name, but we're going to change the value to 900. If we save our page and we go back into the browser and refresh, you're going to now see that these elements on the page have more space. And at large screen sizes, I like this much better. Now, clearly we have some other things that we're going to need to wrestle into place, but this is a start. It is worth mentioning that even though we did this, our media queries are still going to kick in because everything is built mobile first. So even in between like 800 and 900, things are shrinking down. It's not like we have horizontal scrolling, which is perfect. The next thing that I'm going to address is on these two articles, I would prefer to have the image be a little bit smaller and maybe have the text wrap around the image. So let's go ahead and see if we can target that. I'm going to see what's controlling the image. The image currently is inside of a figure element. And then you can see there's an H2, the figure, and then the paragraph underneath. I'm going to go ahead and try using this class right here that's on the figure. I will copy that. We'll jump back into our web page, and this is going to be some of my general rules. So I'm going to keep this outside of my media query. I'll make a comment that identifies this as more like general page layout controls. And then I'm just going to make one more comment and say float picture. I'll use the selector that we just copied. And let's go ahead and give this a float of left. I'm going to reduce the size of the image by using a width of 50%. And generally, when I float something on the left, I'll either add padding or margin on the right. So we'll go ahead and try adding some padding to the right. Let's just add 15 pixels. I'm going to save this. And if we go back to the front end portion of the website, now if we refresh the page, you're going to see that there is no change. The issue is that I copied this class, but this class has spaces in between it. And what that means is that these are actually 3 different CSS classes. It's not just one class. we cannot have spaces in our CSS classes. So if I wanted to use all three of those for the sake of specificity, I would need to eliminate the spaces and add dots. If we save this now and we go back to the browser and refresh, you can now see that my images are floating and we have a little bit of space on the right. I like this much better. I feel like it optimizes the space. If you still want to make some adjustments, for instance, the paragraph in this case has some margin on the top. I would rather have the text be up at the top. And these elements right here, this paragraph is just a paragraph. I don't want to remove that margin on the top of all paragraphs, but just paragraphs that are associated within this area. And you can see here's my figure. The paragraph isn't in the figure, but all of these things are in this div. Now, I'm guessing that these classes are somewhat generic, so this div is probably being used elsewhere on my website. I may not want this behavior to occur. So in this case, I'm going to go into the WordPress backend. We're going to go to that particular page, and we are currently working on the home page. I'm going to open up my list view, and let's go ahead and just find this group. So this particular group is the container that's holding all of these things. I basically only want to control this paragraph, not other paragraphs, as I mentioned. So in order for me to be able to do that, I'm going to go to the advanced tab of the CSS within WordPress, and I'm going to add an additional CSS class. So we are going to call this floated pic, and that class is being applied to the group. I'm going to save this. And now if we go back to the front end portion of WordPress, and I want you to keep your eye on this element. This is the div, which is that group, I believe. If we refresh this, you should see that this div now contains this new class of floated pic. So what I would want to do is I would want to make sure that both of these groups, because I want both of these groups to have that same behavior. So I'm going to give them both the same class name, floated pic. And of course, you're going to want to save this. So now if we come back here, we have our floated pic on the first grouped element. And then if we come down to the next group element, you can see that floated pic class exists. With this class on there, I can now target just these paragraphs. I might even want to use specificity and target my images. So I think I'm just going to do that. I'm going to use dot floated pic. And at this point, I probably don't need this. I could just write figure, and that should give me the same thing. So I'm going to come down below and I'm going to say floated pic space P. I'm using the descendant selector method. Let's just use margin, and we're going to say top is going to be 0, right and left can be auto, and then the bottom is going to be 1 rem. And I'll save this. We'll come back to the front end portion. And if we refresh, you can see that both of these elements now have that behavior. Now the button, of course, is here because there's space for it. This one, we have this leaf, so it's forcing the button to break. And that's fine. If you wanted to adjust that, you could certainly make further adjustments. But you can see how when you add your own classes, you have the ability to then use that class. And because you inserted that class, it's not being used anywhere else. I really like this method because it ensures that I have a little bit more control over the various areas of my web page. We're going to continue to scroll down on the page. And this is the next area I want to address. This area is using the query loop. So if we look down in this page, we have this stack, and inside of the columns, we're using the query loop. So query loop is something that we talked about previously. It is going through and grabbing all of the posts that we wanted to kind of include on our web page. These posts are not really displaying in the way I want. The first thing to note is that we have the picture, we have the date, there's no title. And if we look back at the back end, you can see that the title is appearing. So the title is existing, but we don't see the title. So if we look through here, you can see that we have our featured image, we have our date, we have our title, and let's actually move the title to the top. So we'll do title, featured image, and then date. If we save this, however, the title is still not going to be present. The reason that the title isn't showing is because we had previously used some CSS that is changing the display of the title to none. If we look at the class that's on this H2, it is WP block posts title. And if you recall earlier in our class, we wanted to hide the text that said home, and we used the CSS class that was being used on that post title, which basically is the page title. And we changed the display to none. So this CSS is coming from our CSS file. If we uncheck this, you can see home comes back. And if we scroll down on our page, now we get our titles. So what we want to do is we want to eliminate the title that is being used up here, but we don't want to eliminate the title that's being used down below. Now, because this element is not something we can clearly put a class on because it is dynamically created in WordPress, it is probably better for us to possibly target this element right here. Or our other option is to be more specific. So we could kind of come up the DOM and try to find out what this element is, or we could maybe use a first of type selector. So instead of using the WP block post title, if we did something like main and then did H1 first of type, and we could even put that class on there, you can see that home goes away. And then if we go down here, now these show up. So in this case, I think this solution is a little bit better because there are other sections of our webpage, other pages that might be using this same WP block post title class, and we might inadvertently be hiding those. So let's just make this change in our CSS. That was one of the first things that we did right here. So I'm just going to update that with our more specific selector. It doesn't seem like there would be any instances that an H1 would be used before, since the only thing that really appears before is our navigation element. And there's nothing else in main that's going to have that H1. So that takes care of that situation. Now let's come down here and talk about what we want to do with these post loops. Ideally, I feel like this picture is too big and this is taking up too much space. So what I want to do is I want to alter this to maybe a 3-column layout at a large screen size. At a small screen size, I'm okay with the 1-column layout. I would like to maybe control some of the spacing between these elements, but at large screen, I don't like the 1 column. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what is controlling these. What can we use as a hook? We have images inside of figures. They're followed by this div. This is the date right here. So you can see that we have this div right here. And it looks like the figure has the margin on the bottom. I want to kind of make the date a little bit closer. So I probably want to remove that margin on the bottom. And if we look, there are LI items. The LI element controls the heading of H2, the figure, and then the date element. And then these are all inside this UL element. Once again, these class names seem a little generic. So let's go into our CSS. Let's grab the query loop, which my query loop is selected. I'm going to come into my CSS portion, into advanced, and let's add additional CSS. So we're just going to call this post loop, and I'm going to save that. And by doing that, now I'm going to have my own custom class name. So if we refresh and we find the element that is encompassing these, here it is right here. It's this div. And you can see here's my post loop. So now I can target these things using post loop. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use post loop. I'm going to grab the figure and we'll remove the margin on the bottom. I also think I want to maybe make the H2s only in this scenario a little bit smaller. So I'll probably use that same more specific class of post loop h2, and we'll make the h2s be a little bit smaller. And then the final thing I want to do is I want to create this 3-column at larger screen sizes. So we'll put that inside of our media query, and I'm going to go ahead and target my UL. So we'll use post loop UL, and we'll use grid or flexbox or something to make these appear in multiple columns. So let's jump into our CSS and take care of this. I'm going to start off by targeting the figure. So I'll make a little comment down here, and we'll say post loop elements. And I'm going to use my dot post loop. And then we're going to say, and I forget what the date is now. Let's just check that really quick. This is a div. So post loop div. I probably want to just use this class as well. So maybe I don't even need div, but we'll use post loop dot WP block post date. And let's go ahead and change the font style to italic. Let's target the figure elements, and we're just going to say margin bottom 0. And then finally, we want to make these elements appear in multiple columns. So maybe at our min width of 800 pixels, we have 2 columns, and then let's make another media query at like 1,000 pixels. That'll place them in 3 columns. So I'll just write this one first. I'm just going to identify this as my post loop, and then we're going to use dot post loop, and we'll target UL, and we're going to say display as grid. I'm going to use grid template columns. And let's go ahead and use the repeat modifier, and we'll write 3, 1 FR. And let's add a gap of maybe 2 rems. And let's just check this and make sure. And actually, I realized I put 3. I had said 2 before. So let's modify that down to 2. Let's save this and we'll refresh. So at a minimum width of 800 pixels or above, we now have these 2 columns. And then anything less than 800 pixels, it's going to go to 1 column. So I'm liking that better. You can see this is a little tighter. I forgot to make the H2s a little bit smaller, so let's go ahead and do that as well. And then we'll make another media query that will have this display in 3 columns if it's larger than, let's say, 1100 pixels. So I'm going to come up here outside of the media query, and we will go ahead and control our H2. So let's use dot post loop H2. I'm going to say font size, and I don't know what the font size is. Let's just figure that out really quick. So I'm going to click on my H2. You can see in here that the font size is being set by a variable. So it's actually using a clamp function. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what this is, but if you go to computed and you look for font size, you can see like this is the font size. It's 31 pixels. Clamp is cool because it will resize things as my page gets smaller. Okay, so armed with that knowledge, we can now make a decision as to what size we want that to be. So let's just set the font size maybe to 24 pixels. I'm just going to make it smaller. And let's go ahead and make our media query. I'm just going to copy this part of my post loop, and we'll make a new media query. I'll just put extra large screens, and we'll write at media min width, and now we'll set it to 1100, and we'll open our curly braces, and then inside I'm going to use dot post loop UL. I shouldn't have to specify the display of grid or the gap because those have already been set. So I'm just simply going to set the number of columns to 3, and let's save this, and we'll go back to the browser. And if we refresh now, you can see that my H2s are a little bit smaller. I like that better. And if my page is bigger than 1100, where's our grid? I know what I forgot. I forgot the PX. I need to tell it what the units are. So let's add that in there. We'll refresh our page. Now we have 3 columns at the large screen size. If we go ahead and reduce the page size down, so anything less than 800, we have 2 columns. And then obviously at the small screen size, we just have one column. You have a lot of creativity and flexibility using your child theme, and you can style things that maybe are not so easy to do using the backend portion of WordPress. Some of these things potentially you could do, maybe not so easily, but I love being able to uniquely control these things. My process is that I go through the page and I try to figure out like what is bugging me. What do I want to do? For instance, this box right here, I don't like how it's slammed up at the top. So I would want to figure out why is it doing that? And you can see this element appears to have a bunch of padding on the bottom. It's using this variable, but the padding on the top is being overrun. And it looks like, once again, this is a result of the padding that we added to the WP block group. If you recall, that was the padding that we did up at the top to snug up our hero image to our navigation. And this is super common in WordPress. You make a change, but you weren't specific enough. And because WordPress reuses those classes, it might affect other things that you don't really realize. So in this case, what can we do? How can we remove this particular element? And we need to find out where that's being applied. So it's on this main element right here. Our selector was pretty generic. We just used WP block group. What if we just change this to main.wp block group? If I come back here, and I believe this was something we did at the top of our page, it's right here. If I simply change this to main.wp block group, we go back to the front end part and we refresh. That did not work. And let's try to figure out why. Oh, I know what's happening. It actually took care of the padding, but not the margin. So more than likely, the margin is connected to something else. It looks like that WP block group. Do you see how it's being used on this div right here too? This is the first descendant of the main. This might be an instance where we could potentially add a custom class. So if we select our cover image and we come down to our advanced area, and let's just add a custom class of hero and save our page. We'll come back and let's refresh our page. If we refresh our page, we should be able to find our hero class. And that element is actually located underneath a couple of other divs. That's probably not going to help us, but what could help us is using that first of type trick that we did, because right inside of main, the first div is the area that we really want to remove that padding on the top. You can see if we removed that, that would snug that up. So let's use that instead. I'll go back to my code editor, and instead of using main, let's use main space div colon first of type. And then we'll use our WP block group. I'll save this. And if we come back and refresh, that gets rid of it on the div, but now it exists on main. So let's use a group selector and add main to that. So here I'm just going to say main, comma, and then main div first of type. And we'll go ahead and refresh, and that looks much better. And now if we scroll down, this area of the page is looking better. There's still some other adjustments we could do. I don't like how the text is at the top of this little box right here. So I probably want to add some padding and move that down, but hopefully you get the idea. I would encourage you to practice using this technique. It does take a little bit of time to get used to in the beginning, but the more you do it, the easier it is. And pretty soon you'll be able to wrangle your website to look exactly how you want it to.